Hello and welcome everyone to today's Very God Boss Live webinar. We're so excited to have you all join us. We're going to give folks a few seconds to connect, so hopefully you didn't miss much. While we're waiting, we would absolutely love to know where everybody's tuning in from today. You'll see on the right side of your screen that there's a chat box. So if you feel comfortable in doing so, please send us a message saying hey and let us know where you're joining from. Amazing. Okay, it looks like we have quite a few folks joining from all over. We have Arizona and Maryland, North Carolina, New York City and Tampa, Brazil, Ohio, Switzerland. Oh my gosh, wow, what a presence. This is amazing. So we will get started. First, I'd like to introduce myself. As you probably can see, my name is Valentina Lanisi. I am a senior account manager at the Muse and Very God Boss. Before we get started, we just have a few quick housekeeping announcements. So this session will be recorded and shared via email with all of the registrants. During the discussion, we would absolutely love to hear from you, and we really mean it. So we do hope that you use the stage chat on the right side of the screen to send messages, comments, questions, and reflections to both the panelists and to also one another. I'm now excited to kick off today's event, Explore Career Paths for Women in Operations, sponsored by Enovis. For those who don't know, Very God Boss is the largest online career community for women. Millions of women visit Very God Boss for career connections, jobs, community advice, hard to find intel about how companies treat women, and virtual events like this. We are absolutely thrilled to be joined by two leaders in operations at Enovis. We have Lindsey Goad, Director of Strategic Sourcing of Prevention and Recovery at Enovis, and Dana Diep, Director of Manufacturing Operations at Enovis. Would you each take a minute to introduce yourselves? We'd love to hear what's going on in your life, both personally and professionally, and what you do in your role today at Enovis. Dana, we'll start with you.
I was hoping we started with Lindsey so I can just add on to her. So my name is Dana Diep. I work at Enovis, Manufacturing Operations Director. We are a small site. I often like to say that our site is small, but we're mighty with a small site like ours. We make our flagship Defiance products that if anyone watches college football, you'll see a lot of our braces, which is behind Lindsey right now. She's modeling for us. Our flagship products that we make here at our site. Really excited to be here. It's something that, as we talked through during this time, it's not something that I'm quite used to, but I think as part of being Enovis has been really good about promoting women leadership. And so this is just a second opportunity that I've had to kind of talk through my career.
Amazing. Lindsey?
Awesome. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you might be in the world. So thanks for joining Dana and I today. I know we're both really excited to talk to you. I'm Lindsey Goad. I'm the Director of Strategic Sourcing for P&R, which is probably a big question mark what that is. So we're part of the prevention and recovery side of our business here at Enovis. Been here for about 2.5 years now and moved around a little bit since I've been here at Enovis. Started in purchasing and then just recently, which I'll get a chance to talk about a little bit later, had an amazing opportunity to really take the next step in my career, focus on my development and dive into strategic sourcing. So I've been learning a lot the last several months, had a lot of great leaders kind of guiding me through this, but working with our supply base and talking to our suppliers about contracts, where are we going to be sourcing material from? There's a lot of conversations happening in the world right now. Where should we be getting our material from? And the most cost-effective, but also the best quality material so that Dana and her team can do things like make these braces that you get to see behind me. So that's a little bit about me and excited to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. We are so excited for the discussion today. And for those just tuning in, I just want to remind everyone, we will be answering questions on the chat on the right side of your screen. I promise, I say this every time, and I really do mean it. We do take questions. So if there's no question too big or too small, please submit them, and we will do our best to respond to as many as we can. And now we can get started. So, you both obviously have a background in operations. Can you talk a little bit about a pivotal moment or decision that shaped your career path in operations? Ultimately, like what made you decide to pursue a career in operations? Dana, you can go first.
Sure. I wouldn't say it was a pivotal moment in my career, but maybe it was a pivotal moment in my life. I went to college, not knowing what I was going to do, and I met a lady who was actually going to engineering school during that time. I went through. She was working on an engineering project, and she and I just had like a really good conversation on, where the failure points could be, et cetera, et cetera. And she said to me, Dana, you should become an engineer. And that was the first time I realized, wow, maybe I do have a mindset to be an engineer. That kind of led me into going into engineering school, but I really struggled in engineering school. It's not an easy, easy major, considering number one, there's a lot of math. Number two, it's a very male dominated major during the time, and because I had an amazing mentor of mine. He was my eighth grade teacher. Funny enough, he is my eighth grade teacher. I went back. I absolutely just loved him. And I went back to visit him ever since I was in eighth grade. He also married my husband and I. He became ordained for the day and married my husband and I. And so he was a really big part of my life. Anytime there were questions about school, et cetera, he was always there for me. One day when I came to him and told him I was really struggling through engineering school, he said to me, well, Dana, maybe not everybody's made for engineering. Maybe you can think about a different major. And so during that time, that really kind of hurt my feelings a lot, thinking, here's a person who really understood my capacity for learning. So I didn't let that stop me. Good thing. It didn't stop me at all. I actually said, well, in the back of my head, and I don't think I've ever told him this, I said, well, I'm going to show you. So through a lot of grit and tenacity and just really a lot of hard work, I went and got my mechanical engineering degree. So I wouldn't say that was a pivotal moment in terms of my career, but it was definitely a pivotal moment in my life that kind of set the stage for my career.
I love that. Tell me I can't do something and I will show you.
And I will show you.
Amazing. And Lindsey, tell us a little bit about how you pivoted into operations.
Yeah. So, I mean, kind of a similar, I guess it sounds like similar to Dana a little bit. I really stumbled into operations, I think, by a total accident. So I started, I was in college, really confused about what am I going to do? Am I going to go to grad school? Am I going to go to nursing school? Everything that was in front of me from the beginning always felt like I had to go clinical, right? In some way, shape, or form. And so I was working, I got my EMT license. I was working in a hospital in sterile processing, which is really a thankless career. So for those in sterile processing, it's a lot of hard work and you don't get a lot of, hey, you're doing awesome. So I honestly got lucky. I had no idea this whole world existed. I'm, 19, 20 years old and haven't even thought about what happens in a hospital, right? What goes on behind closed doors. Had no idea that medical device was a potential career that you could go into. And so I always felt pretty lost, but I had a sales rep from formerly Wright Medical, but a surgical sales rep approached me and say, hey, we need to get somebody in here in distribution, coming and delivering trays if you're interested. So I took a leap. I had no idea what I was doing. I thought this was just biding my time until it was time to figure out what came next, until I got it together a little bit. And that really ended up taking off for me. So, I did a lot of distribution on the surgical side of the industry, managing, operations warehouses that we had in the field. And really, like I said, it was just stumbled upon something, took a leap. And you'll see as we get to chat a little bit more, a lot of the choices that I've made the last several years have just been about, I got to take a leap right now. And so I think I got really lucky in the sense of have had a lot of people that have seen my strengths and my character and have invested in me, but it also took the chance to say, all right, I'm going to go and see what comes next here.
Yeah, that's amazing. Even though there's serendipity, right? It's that following that kind of glimmer of something that is interesting and sparks that motivation, which I think is so important when it comes to charting your career path, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. And can you both talk a little bit about some of the skills that are really critical to your success in operations? How did you develop them? Maybe Dana, you can take it first.
I talk a lot about grit and tenacity, and I think great teams are always made of that grit. There's something to be said about the tactical skills and things that you learn on the job, but I think there's something to be more said about a team that has grit. Great teams win because of grit, and so I think some of the skills that I've learned over time, and maybe even trying to teach my team that we win through some of that grit, is honing in those skills. And Lindsay will probably talk about this a little bit too. Is I'm always a curious person. I like to ask questions and I learn through asking. Reading is not always my strong suit either, and so I really like to learn through listening to what people have to offer, listening to what they say, and then connecting the dots. I think is really important. And so, as if you're a curious person and you listen to people and listen and learn through them and connect the dots, you can solve a lot of problems. And I think over the years, I've just learned to kind of hone in on that just by continuously asking questions and just always having tenacity to figure out, okay, there's if there's a will, there's always a way. I think that's really important to always think about because, as engineers, we always think of solving problems. And so you got to just always constantly stay curious.
Yeah, I think Dana actually stole half of my answer there, but we kind of planned it, but we didn't plan it that way. it's a great segue because that was kind of where
Setting the
my
stage
perspective,
for you.
Setting the stage. She teed me up. Yeah, mine is probably curiosity as well. I used to kind of think that I was maybe nosy or barging in at the wrong place. I'm slightly famous at Enovis for derailing a couple big meetings because I had questions that really threw off the flow of what we were supposed to be able to do at some Kaizen events. So, but that's kind of, I think the biggest thing for me is I've rebranded it and I like that we're calling it curiosity instead of calling it, something negative because I think it's important, right? So you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable because that's the way that we grow, right? Not only personally, but also as an organization. And it really leads to productive conversations, which I think is important. So, always get a way to say, hey, I have a dumb question. Well, there's definitely no dumb questions. If we're not putting out, the right things and being transparent about what's happening, we're not going to be able to actually solve what's going on.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? Because I think oftentimes, I love that idea of rebranding, right? We as a society are kind of taught that, there are right questions, there are wrong questions, there's right times, there's wrong times. And so keeping that spirit of kind of internal curiosity and asking questions, it seems to be very much a core part of being in operations, right? And the fact that that's applauded and welcomed, I think speaks a lot to the, culture in general when it comes to working in operations, but also it sounds like the company culture of Enovis. So that's really, really cool to hear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and you can't solve problems unless you ask questions.
Exactly.
You can assume an answer, but it may not be right. So you got to keep digging and keep asking questions to get to the right answer.
Love that. And Dana, can you talk a little bit, maybe for those who aren't as initiated in the space, what are some roles that are coming into the operations field that women specifically should, be watching out for that might be cool to check out?
Yeah, I think there's something going on with my computer. Did I lose you guys? No.
No, you're there.
I think there's a lot of, I wouldn't say it's very operation specific, but I'll talk about a little bit about technology. There is a lot of talk about AI right now. AI is just something that is new to not to the organization, but to the world. And being curious about AI and what it can do for making efficient processes in operations, I think is really important. There may be different equipment out there that can be machine learned or have AI that will make your operations or your production process faster or better. There probably are opportunities of using AI to gather data, to look at data in a different way that could also give you information that you can react faster, right? In a time where information is really important and fast information is really important, I think AI could be the next step for anyone in any field to be able to research, to be curious about, to learn, to see how that can help them in their career. And, it's so new. No one really knows what it can do for operations, but there's got to be so many things out there that it just hasn't been touched.
Yeah, we're doing some pretty cool stuff in procurement right now with AI, where we're recently trying to introduce where we put our contracts in, right? And it's going to do all the interpreting for us. When is your contract over? What key points do you need to know? Reminders of dates that are coming up so that I don't have to go and dig through that, right? So little things like that to all the work that Dana's doing in operations, on the production line. It's pretty amazing of what you can do.
I think just also the one thing, there's always trade shows, and the trade shows where you can get kind of the most updated technology out there, particularly when it comes to production equipment, how you run production lines. And so that's another place where I think AI or maybe just the different equipment can, you can bring people to learn about it and have them come and try to implement it in your operations.
Yeah, it's really interesting that both of you have touched upon the use of AI, artificial intelligence and machine learning as a means of creating efficiency, but always with this, I think oftentimes there's this perception of AI and ML taking jobs, right? And so to hear you both talk about in different ways, these kinds of, the skills and expertise will come in handy, I think is really, really interesting. And in that vein, maybe Lindsey, you can touch upon, I think you started to kind of talk a little bit about it. Obviously having certain skills requires either obtaining them, right? Sometimes, it requires upskilling or reskilling. Are there any resources in particular that you use that helped you in your career progression when you pivoted?
Yeah. There's a couple that I want to touch on, but a big thing that I want to lean into when it comes to skills. So I think it's really important if you're starting in your career or trying to figure out what your career looks like, because this was the place that I was at when I was in college. Everyone's skills look different, right? And we refer to these things, or we talk about them as, are you book smart or are you street smart, right? And if in school, if you're not book smart, it's easy to feel like you're failing. I definitely felt that way. Like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? What am I going to do? I can barely read this textbook right now, right? But I think the important thing is that you need to find a way to lean into what your talents are. And it's not necessarily the talents that you see in others that are going to be what make it big, right? And I think that's a big misconception, is you got to be top of the class. You got to do this if you're going to go far. I think, college was tough for me, but once I found my place and what my strengths were and my skills were, that's where I really started to thrive. And that's a big important piece of it, is figure out what your skills are. Another one that Dana and I are both really passionate about in regards to resources is mentorship. So find that mentor. Dana's already kind of mentioned a couple people that have really resonated with her. I could name several, right? So find that mentor early on, someone that you can learn from, or it could also be someone that you want to work with, because sometimes having that mentor that's maybe a cross-functional partner, and our businesses, knock heads a little bit. If you find that person that you work with, you get to learn from each other, because mentorships are two-way, right? And that person can actually be a partner in a different way. Maybe now they become an ally in a meeting instead of somebody that maybe there was friction with before. But I would really suggest finding the people that support you and believe in you. They'll be your long-term advocates. I think we could all shout out here several mentors. I have so many mentors that I've met along the way, and leaders that have helped me get to where I'm at. So I think that those are probably some of the bigger skills you can lean into.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? And oftentimes we think of traditionally mentorship as like somebody who's above you, right? And kind of, it's really interesting and cool, Lindsey, that you mentioned like a coworker, a colleague, right? Somebody who can inspire you and kind of hold you accountable in a lot of cool ways. We do have a question that came in that I think is actually quite related, and we'll open it to both of you for your perspectives. But in that same vein of really trying to gain experience, gain exposure, Tracy asks us, actual experience does go a long way, right? So with that being said, especially for a function that is really, it sounds like mathematically focused, engineering focused, there's a lot of, tangible sort of expertise that comes with it. What do you both think about getting Lean Six Sigma Green Belt, or any types of certifications related to operations?
Well, that's a good Dana question.
Yeah, can I answer that?
Yeah.
So I'll tell a little bit of a story in terms of like certifications, and I'll go into what I think about certifications. I was a young engineer. I was working as a production engineer on a production line, looking at statistics, right? Math isn't my strong suit, but I made it my strong suit. So if it's a skill that I talked about, it was something that I really honed in on. It wasn't so much the math, it was just learning how to use numbers in a way that would tell a story for yourself. But going back to the certification, I was working with the supplier. The supplier was talking about statistics, and the way they were talking about it didn't make sense, meaning that I guess in better words, they were wrong. They were just wrong. And the supplier at the end says, well, please don't challenge me because I am Lean Six Sigma certified. So to me, that told me that the person can use a certification to say that they are good at what they do when it's really not about the certification. It's about the skills and how you use it. So I'm Lean Six Sigma certified. I'm actually a black belt, and I also did my master black belt. I love teaching it, but I think the biggest thing about having a certification like that, or even just Lean or Six Sigma, there's two different philosophies, right? Is to really find somebody that can mentor you in how to use it in the right way. You don't always have to use a hammer for a problem that is a screwdriver, vice versa. And so I think it's really important if someone's going to take that certification is to really understand it, what the meaning is behind it, and use it at the right time. Sometimes you don't have to go through the entire process because Lean Six Sigma goes through this DMAIC process: define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. Sometimes the answer is right in front of you. Sometimes it's just a process flow map to just get to the right answer or to problem solve. So although I think the certification is really important because it gives you the fundamentals, I think what's important is how do you apply it? How do you apply it to get to the right answer that is common sense, meaning you're not putting a lot of bureaucracy into the process, but you're making it more efficient and you're getting to the answer. So that's what I think about the certification.
Yeah, and I think that's that dovetails really nicely with what we think about when there is such an emphasis on upskilling, reskilling, and taking courses and getting certificates and things, right? Is that always with the end goal? It should be, how am I applying this, right? And not just being able to say, I have this, but actually thinking about fundamentally what you're learning and being able to apply it in a way that that makes sense, right? And I do love that expression that you used, Dana. I wrote it down, like math that tells a story. I'm gonna have to tell that to my data team next time. Back to me with some stuff, but it just doesn't make any sense. Awesome. Well, I think, Dana, you had touched upon something that I thought was really interesting early on. You talked a little bit about the realities of working in operations, which is, it being predominantly a male-dominated field. So I would just love to know, your perspective on some of the strategies that you have found most effective and helpful navigating the space with the realities being, being somebody from not being the majority.
I know this is going to sound very cliche, but I think being yourself is just really important, right? I mean, you can come in trying to portray yourself differently versus who you really are, but at the end of the day, people are going to see through that. And I think being yourself is really important. I grew up with 4 brothers and 2 sisters, and so being around men wasn't ever uncomfortable. So that's kind of it's easy for me to say that being yourself when you're around that is easy, right? But I think at the end of the day, just being yourself, being true to yourself, being transparent, admitting when you're wrong, admitting when you're right, taking ownership when you're right. I think that's really important. A lot of us don't say, well, I told you so. Well, there's nice ways of saying that, I think. But I think just being yourself is really important.
Yeah, authenticity and ownership are definitely really important tenets. Lindsey, do you have any thoughts on how you've been able to navigate the space?
Yeah. I think for me, the biggest thing is, always making sure that I have a presence in a meeting. So that's not necessarily meaning I'm running out and yelling as loud as I can, but just making sure that I'm present and I'm contributing. I'm not afraid to contribute and ask a question or give comments, but I'm always showing people that I'm there. Again, I think it's just don't be afraid to make your contribution, whether you feel like it's a silly answer or a silly thing, it's really not. And that's something when I'm sitting at tables with large amounts of people, I always want to make sure everyone knows that I'm there in some way, shape, or form. And I think you can shift your perspective, right? So I played a lot of soccer growing up, which was a team sport. And if you shift your perspective to this concept of your voice matters to the success of this team, just like if you're playing soccer, you got to do it all together, right? It makes it so that you feel like you're doing it for a good reason instead of just, oh, I'm going to be drowned out here because what I have to say doesn't matter. It matters, right? Everything you have to say matters. And, for me, being shy was never a problem, as you can probably tell, but somehow through this industry and my biggest path that we'll probably get a chance to talk about a little bit more has been in leadership. So I've been in leadership for the majority of my career, but somehow through my career, I've been able to find my voice even more than I already had it. And, was able to just speak up and make sure that I was heard.
Yeah, that's such an interesting way to reframe, feeling comfortable speaking in a public setting. I do really love that. I think that's great. We do have a specific question. I think that this is interesting. It's related to this. How would you recommend having a voice if particularly you're the kind of person who always loves to, I think somebody who's probably got a really good background in operations, right? Somebody who loves fact checking, taking time to process information. How would you go about doing that?
I'm not the type that likes to do this, but I have most of my employees are the type that like to fact check. So I think from that perspective, I can tell you as a leader what I'd like to hear. I think being transparent about that, right? Saying, hey, I need some time to think about this. Have we thought about the following data points? Let me take the time to go seek that out. And I would like to bring it back to the group. Or finding a way to make sure, hey, I think just calling it out. Hey, I'd like to talk about this more, or I need a little bit of time. You don't have to say, I'm going to commit to this right now, but just saying, I need time to think about this before I'm ready to really move forward with whatever that looks like. And that's important, right? At Enovis, we do the disc a lot, and the D's and the I's, we like to jump headfirst into the pool. That's me. Like, I am not looking if there is water in that pool. We are jumping. But we have to embrace the people that are our S's and our C's that need that analytics, that need those moments to process and think. And we have to find a way to bring those together because it's a full circle, right?
Absolutely.
I think the nice thing about Enovis is that we have these types of tools to kind of understand, the predominant kind of traits of our employees. And so when you take these types of these quizzes, it kind of tells you who you are. And so if like I'm a D, I will drive to problem solving pretty quickly. But the funny thing is, I also like data, right? And so I think the nice thing about Enovis is that it gives you the opportunity to learn people through just some quizzes, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing I think is really important is to trust your gut. Your experiences will drive you to make some type of maybe pre-notion of what the answer needs to look like. And sometimes that gut is really, really important. And sometimes if your gut doesn't tell you that seems right, then go back to the data and say, okay, just like Lindsey was saying, let me go and check, or let me go and verify. I think there's always that trust and verify as a leader that we sometimes do. But I think also there's a lot to say about all those experiences and what your gut tells you.
Yeah, we're not doing a good job as a leadership team, or if we're on a project team or whatever the situation was, we're not doing a good job if we don't stop and think, right? Or if somebody asks for the opportunity to dive in further, we're not respecting the process of what needs to be done to be thorough and detailed, and again, bring everybody's perspective into consideration, right? So that as leaders, we have ownership to making sure we're being that thorough and utilizing people to their strengths.
Yeah, and that's really interesting that Enovis has such an intentional culture built around understanding that people have different ways of processing information and communicating, and actually, commends that, right? Allows people an opportunity to take these kinds of work personality assessments to better understand, to allow people the space to be able to do that. So it's really cool to hear that that's something that is pretty much, part of the company culture. Circling back to kind of what we were talking about a little bit before with respect to working in a really male-dominated space, I'm sure you all can speak to quite a few, of your experiences, but can you talk a little bit about a challenge you faced as a woman in operations, and then ultimately how you overcame it?
Yeah, I can go really quick, and then I'll just pass it over to Dana.
Pass me the baton.
So like I said, I've been in leadership since I was 24. So that was my first position, was managing people who were, several years older than me, actually people who were my colleagues previously. So I had the opportunity, really amazing opportunity, through one of the mentors that I mentioned earlier, who said, hey, we're going to move you to New York. We want you to manage the Northeast Territory for this operations business. You're going to do great, right? I'm 24, never moved out of this state, and I get the chance to move. And to say that was a pivotal moment in my career would be an understatement. I think that was the trajectory I needed, not only from moving, but, just launching me forward. But New York, love me some New Yorkers. I loved my time in New York, but man, you guys are rough. You guys are tough on me. I'm a little 24-year-old Colorado girl who these New Yorkers came at me hard, and they were testing me, right? So, I'm talking about one of the most cutthroat industries in med device, in surgical, in New York City. Like, these guys and women too. There were men and women in this, sales reps in this industry. They come at it, and there was testing from the beginning, right? Seeing how late I would answer the phone calls, see how early I would answer the phone calls. I would have a few people that I would see their names on my phone, and I knew they were calling me to just yell at me, right? And so, being who I was, there was an intimidation factor immediately. And I had to be built up, and I had to swallow my fear of this guy calling me to yell at me and saying, look, my job is to just let you yell at me. So you're going to yell at me, and then we're going to say, what can I do for you right now? And here's how we're going to fix it moving forward. But let's take care of the patient on the table right now, right? And so eventually I gained this trust where they no longer needed to test me, because I always showed up, and I always said, first and foremost, what do we need to do for the patient? What can I do for you right now? And then we'll figure out what actually happened here. So proving myself to them that they could test me and they could push me, but I'm still going to show up. And I earned their respect pretty quickly. And I think that really set me on a trajectory of success here. Of now, I don't feel scared when people call me. We might have hard conversations and we have difficult things to deal with, but I'm going to find an answer, and we're going to work through this together. And there's some resiliency there of swallowing the intimidation and the challenges. It's not personal, right? I had to sit there and say, this isn't a personal attack on me. This is, hey, I'm frustrated. What can we do to get this solved right now? And so that was kind of the big one, was getting through that really scary intimidation factor that came from that new position.
Yeah, as a New Yorker, I can attest. I will say it's so interesting, because your focus, you focused a lot on resiliency, but what I heard and what you were saying was this kind of people first approach, like always reframing, redirecting the conversation back to like, okay, but what can we do about it, right? This sort of, I think Dana talked about it a little bit earlier, right? Solutions oriented mentality that I think is so, so incredible when it comes to kind of shifting, conversations and kind of really overcoming a lot of the stuff that comes with just working in, with others, right? Who have a lot of. Dana, can you talk a little bit about a challenge that you faced?
Yeah, really different from Lindsey, but I think I had went into I started to want to go into startups. So I was going into a field of electrophysiology, and the company I was working for were making ablation catheters, all sorts of catheters for the heart. And if anyone knows anything about electrophysiology, it's a very, very male-dominated field. All the cardiologists are males, all the directors were men. And so I never felt like being a female in this industry or in that industry, particularly because it was a startup, to be such a disadvantage for me. And during that time, it was small. It was quite, I would have to say, a little bit of a toxic place. I finally realized after about a couple of years, telling myself, this isn't the place for me. And what was really pivotal for me was to not try to fight something that I was really unhappy in. And the other thing that was pivotal was also, I realized what made me happy and what did not make me happy, and what I was looking for in a career path, and honestly in a company, right? And so I chose to finally give in and said, I'm going to take some time off to kind of be with my family. And it was right after COVID too, during the time when everybody was thinking about their mental health. I thought finally at that point, it's time for me to focus on my kids and my family. And I left the company. And I don't want to say giving up is the right thing to do, but a lot of us as females feel like we need to just keep fighting it. We need to just play that fight and just keep going. But I think understanding when is really important as much as staying in the fight. And so that was when I realized it was time to go and really find the right company for me to work for. And honestly, Enovis has been a great, great company. And I don't think I don't think I would have come to Enovis if I didn't have those experiences.
Yeah, that's so interesting and so beautifully said, right? That pause allowed you to have the clarity and self-reflection to be able to find something that suited you, right? And to your point, oftentimes this desire to keep pushing and keep prevailing prevents you from having that kind of clarity of focus that is so necessary when it comes to making really important career decisions, right? So that's wonderful. Now that we've talked a little bit about operations, obviously being a male dominated field, we want to talk aspirationally, right? We want to talk about how to, create that shift and change. And so in that same vein, I would say, what can women in operations do today to ensure that they are fostering an inclusive environment for the next generation of talent? Essentially, like, how do you uplift the women who are alongside of you? Lindsey, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I'll go first. Thank goodness. I think there's kind of two things that I would love to talk about here. I think first and foremost, finding your company's affinity group, right? So that's really amazing resources that are starting to emerge that I've just absolutely loved, right? So those companies that have those resources and are proud of those resources and leverage those to success are amazing. It helps you create relationships, mentorships, opportunities, networking, right? So I think that's a really beautiful opportunity for anyone to get to join. But really, I think for me, it's important to remember that as women, we're stronger together, right? So focusing on elevating each other and leaning into each other's strengths. There's room at the table for all of us. Dana and I were actually having a really great conversation about this when we were planning for this. She and I have worked alongside each other, and now we're colleagues. So, I was managing a team that had a dotted line to her, and we sat down in front of each other day one, and there was just this immediate respect, right? There wasn't this, hey, I'm going to try to beat you. I'm going to try to do this better than you. It was, how can we do this together, right? And I think that we I don't know if it was just because Dana's awesome and we had this mutual respect for each other right away, but it was almost instant of like, hey, we're going to have this sit down and we're going to look at each other. And instead of being like, you need to do this better, it was, what can we do together, right? And so that was almost instantaneous, I think, for us.
Yeah, I would have to agree with what Lindsey said in terms of that. I think as women, and we're competitive, right? And I could have easily come into that conversation with Lindsey feeling competitive against her, or competing against her. And I think it's important to take that competitiveness away when it's the right time, right? We always want to win. Lindsey and I are hard drivers. We always want to win. We always want to see results. But I think stepping back and taking that competitiveness away and looking at that person as a person that you can work with rather than someone you have to compete with. And day one, like Lindsey said, it wasn't like that at all. And so it was really an easy relationship, especially when you take that mindset away from yourself. I think the other thing that I think we forget sometimes is that women always have a different perspective. And trying to be inclusive and trying to listen to that is really important, along with, as your leaders and looking at your staff, is to make sure your staff is diverse. I think that's really important too, because I have a staff full of male and I have one female. And it's such a pleasant perspective to have, right? And I think that's really important as leaders when you're looking at your team. How do you diversify? Not because you have to. I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, the best person is going to take that job. But how do you diversify your team to make sure that you have different perspectives? And I think that's really important. We always have to make a conscious effort and kind of think of it, have to consciously make those decisions so that at the end of we always have that different views when we're sitting at the table.
Yeah, it also, I think, really it brings back to kind of what you were talking about with like understanding different personality types, right? When it comes to the conversation and who has, a perspective where they might need time to digest information, right? I love that both of you in your own way have talked about a lot of like team dynamics. I think that's so important too when it comes to inclusivity, right? So it's awesome to see that there's, again, such a commitment to really fostering that through, be it through affinity groups or also through other more intentional ways. It sounds like, Dana, you take a very intentional approach with your team as well, knowing the demographic and the makeup of the team. Getting a little bit more personal and on an individual level, I would love to know a little bit about how Enovis has supported you in your career growth. So maybe, Dana, you can go first.
Sure. So I've been at Enovis now almost 2 years. But one of the really great things that we have here, just like Lindsay was talking about, are affinity groups. And I didn't realize it during the time when Lindsay was kind of pushing me towards this. And it goes back to being uncomfortable, being okay with being uncomfortable. I was chosen to be, I guess, one of the first ones, Lindsay,
The first one. It was the first one.
the first one to do to speak about what it was like to be a woman in a leadership role. And I talked about this in my speech. It was uncomfortable. It was not something that I do often when I talk about myself. And I think because of that group, it stretched me to be okay to be speaking about myself, to be okay with talking about the great things that I've done in my past life and not be apologetic about it. And I think that's where, if anything, in terms of growth, having people like Lindsay in the organization that pushes us to do these types of things has really stretched me from just personal level.
I love that. And Lindsay, what about you?
Yeah. So I want to keep going on the women's leadership group just because Dana mentioned it and it's so important. So, I was in the women's leadership group at my prior company, and I am here at Enovis. And I think the amazing part about Enovis, from my perspective, at my old company, it was a larger team, 5 times bigger than what we are here at Enovis, big company. And so when I went to join the women's leadership group, it was like, okay, yeah, cool, we'll put you on this list. You'll get email updates, we'll host these calls sometimes. Like, you're just kind of part of the masses, right? Again, not downplaying the impact of everything that they were trying to do, but it was so well, it was just so off on kind of autopilot that they already had, everything going here. And what I think is exciting about Enovis is that I've had the opportunity. I came in the door and I said, I want to join the women's leadership group. And they were like, perfect. We need you to do this, this, this. And it's been awesome because they let each site have their leaders that are going to host certain events. So last year was my first year as our site leader here from Southern California, and we got to host 4 amazing quarterly events. Dana spoke last year for International Women's Day, but we're really anchored around elevating our leaders that we see here at Enovis. And I've had a personal hand in being able to influence that. And that's really cool, right? That's a cool moment, and what we've been able to do and what we've been able to share and the impact we've had has been really, really incredible. The other thing that I want to hit on that is amazing is the relationships here with leadership at Enovis. They're very personal relationships in a really positive way. So I recently had the opportunity to have a one-on-one lunch with our CEO. So when leaders come to town, they like to have lunch. So I've had a chance to sit down and have lunch with our president. Our CEO comes along. I was, invited to do that. And I don't feel like Enovis does it to just check a box. I don't think these leaders do it just to say they're doing it. Has anyone ever worked at a company where the CEO actually knows you by name, walked back in the door, a couple months later and said, hi, Lindsay, how are you? Right. So, it felt personal. It felt interested, and it felt invested more so than just, oh, I'm going to have lunch, eat. Nice to meet you. Have a great day. Bye. And so I think that's rare that it is so personal, being able to relate to leaders that are at such a high level, that are going to take the time to spend the time with people like Dana, like myself, and some of the other employees that have had that opportunity as well.
Yeah, that's a very much like walk the walk, talk the talk approach, right? And I love
Yeah.
how you both talked about it being an inside outside thing, right? A lot of times affinity groups, leadership groups, we bring outside talent in and we have, lunch and learns and things like that. But it sounds like there's very much an intentionality of uplifting a lot of the incredible women at Enovis, which is really cool to hear. We do have a few questions from the audience, and actually there's one really apt one that kind of is connected to leadership. So I think I'll start off with that one first, if you all are okay with that. We got a question from Sharon who says, what do you believe are the key characteristics of an effective leader? I think we've heard some tidbits, but would love to know from both of you kind of what do you think makes a great leader?
Dana, why don't you go first? I stole the first last time. So
I know. Yeah, I'll kind of tell a story too, because I like to tell stories. My husband's a school teacher, and he's an amazing school teacher. I think he's an amazing school teacher. But he always says, I'm a great teacher for 80% of the people, and maybe not for 20% of the students. And I think as an effective leader, you can be a great leader for 80% of the folks, but then there's just some that you just don't click with, right? And I think it's really important as leaders to understand that. Again, it goes back to when is enough enough? When do you keep banging your head against a wall trying to make some type of working relationship work? And so I think that's number one, is just understanding, are you an effective leader for that person? Are you the right leader for that person? I think sometimes personalities just don't click. Secondarily, and I think Lindsey and I talked about this, stay curious. Always stay curious. And I can't emphasize that enough. Asking the questions, wanting answers, or not accepting an answer that doesn't seem right. Just constantly stay curious. And I think that's really, really important as being an effective leader. But I think the other thing is just knowing when to say when to.
Yeah. I would say for me, there's kind of two big things that stand out. There's the cliche kind of what's a boss versus what's a leader. And I think it's important to understand and have characteristics of both, right? But, as a leader, my job is not to do the jobs of my employees, right? So I think often bosses don't delegate, right? They do the work because they can do it better and they don't have to go back and correct, right? So but my job is not to do that work. Don't get me wrong. When I was in the warehouse, sometimes we'd be so short staffed that I'd go put on my boots and we'd be slinging stuff in the warehouse together, right? And I know I've seen Dana out there, so I know she does it. So sometimes you just got to do it, right? To stand next to your people and do it. But at the same time, hey, why did we get to this point? What do you need from me in the future so that you don't get to this point of needing me to come? Happy to put on the steel toe boots and be out here, but what can I do for you next time, right? So really focusing on removing those barriers. And then the other thing that I think gets a little bit scary for leaders sometimes, but I have always felt so much excitement around, is exporting employees. So as long as they stay within the company, because that's our goal, right? We don't want to lose good talent, but it's really easy to get scared by the fact of, oh, this person wants to move up and move into a new role. I'm going to lose them. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? As a leader, the answer is, I'm going to figure it out, right? But this person gets to go and do something amazing, and I helped them get there. That to me is like the biggest celebration of success, is when I get to elevate somebody to the next level. That means I did my job right. And so I love to lean into that. I love these moments. I'm never scared to talk to somebody about, are you in the right position? Do we need to look at what comes next here for you? Because we shouldn't shy away from that. Just because we don't want to do the work, or we're scared of if we're in a backfill, that doesn't matter. It's getting that person to the next level. That's what really matters.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. I think you all touched upon such great tenets of good leadership, right? A lot of what we see with also service leadership, that eternal curiosity, that willingness to kind of work alongside your people, but also recognizing when they need to move up or move on, and really welcoming that as a reflection of having good team dynamic as opposed to something that you have to worry about. So awesome.
Yep.
I think it goes a long way when you're in the trenches with your team.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
And Lindsey said this, and I do this as well, is we're in the trenches with the team, not because we're trying to gain any brownie points. We're in there because we're trying to hit some type of result. And I think that's really important when you're a leader and you're finding that your team needs some support. You are not above them to be able to be there to work in whatever capacity you need to help them out. But I think along the same lines, it does bring a lot of credibility. It brings some relatableness, I guess, if you will, to the team members. And I think that's also important as well.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, you got to be out there with them, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. That's also wonderful and so valid. We do have another question from Anika, who is asking a question about operations in the nonprofit space, inquiring about if either of you have ever worked in the nonprofit space in an operations-focused role. If so, what are some of the overlap with similarities and skills that you might have experienced? And if not, and this is an interesting one, and I think this is one that might be helpful for a lot of folks who are joining us. Do for-profit operations roles typically only exist in tech and manufacturing industries?
That's a hard one. Lindsey, do you have an answer for that? I'm punting to you.
Oh, wow. I was about to punt it to you. Yeah, I mean, I haven't been in operations in nonprofit, but my sister is in solar, and she's in a different side of solar, commercial solar. But I know that those types of things do exist. It depends on what type of nonprofit, but I think you're going to find similar skills, right? And I think we're talking about a lot of soft skills here. I don't think we're sitting here being like, hey, you got to do this, 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 and this to do well. I really think that those skills are really going to be about, like Dana and I've said, leaning into your talents, embracing your strengths, being yourself. I think is going to be really strong. You are talented. You are here for a reason, right? And so embrace that. But I really foresee that being the same, especially knowing, where my sister has kind of come through the ranks in regards to the nonprofit and moving into solar. It's a lot of the same kind of tenacity, the grit, everything that's really associated with it. I think you're going to find really similar results.
Awesome. Yeah, so I do want to be mindful of time, and I do want to get to some of our last questions. So forgive me, we will move on. At Fairy Godboss, we have a tradition of asking our panelists the following. We've observed that, and you all have kind of touched upon it in some shape or form, women do not necessarily always feel comfortable enough bragging or taking ownership of all of the amazing and incredible things that they achieve. Can you share with us, respectively, an accomplishment, either personal or professional, that you're most proud of? Lindsey, would you like to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I can go first. So I recently found a volunteer opportunity that I'm really proud of, that I actually found through our Enovis Women's Leadership Group. We hosted a local organization to our area in Southern California that does a lot of work for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. So it's been a really big pivotal change in my life to explore what I would consider a very, society has kind of claimed it as an off-limits topic, but I think it's really important to be able to bring awareness to topics like sexual assault, domestic violence, and support survivors in their journey. So, that's been really amazing to learn. It's been fulfilling to help people heal. And more than anything, I've met and had the ability to support some really powerful and strong individuals that have gone through some pretty crazy times. So that's been amazing. And something I'm really proud of. Volunteer opportunities don't always look the same. And so my feedback on that front is if you stumble upon something that feels like it could be something that you're really good at, that just felt like I would be good at it, do it, try it, because it's been opened this whole other world to me to help me bring up conversations that I think are really important. And I think that I've been able to be very pivotal in some people's lives at moments where they've needed them.
That's incredible. And what a testament to the fact that you all, the kind of work that, you can do in Enovis allows you to interact with a lot of these incredible organizations and do such phenomenal advocacy and work. Dana, can you tell us about your accomplishment?
So Lindsey and I talked about this, and she answered the question for me, not here, but she answered the question for me when we were writing all this down. So 10, 15 years ago, if you asked what my biggest accomplishment was, I'd probably tell you, well, I got an engineering degree and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. And it was all geared towards my career, right? And I know this will sound really cliche, but honestly, my biggest accomplishment has been my two boys. I think as women, we kind of forget sometimes as we're trying to grow our career, there is that family behind you that is always supporting you. And so my biggest accomplishments, or the biggest thing I would like, Lindsay will hear me talking about this, is are my family and my boys.
As a fellow mom to a boy myself, I would say your response actually hits it perfectly. So completely understand.
Yeah. It's not as important. My career isn't as important as it used to be versus growing the family and nourishing the family.
Yeah. And I also think what's really interesting is you talked a little bit about how you came to Enovis and how it was like at a point where you took some time with your family and then you rejoined the workforce, right? You joined the company. And so I think it's really cool that you felt like this was the kind of place where you could have your career and enjoy your family. I think that's something that as women, we often are looking for those kinds of, insights in those organizations, and we struggle to find them. So that's amazing. Another question that we also ask at Fairy God Boss is, what advice would you give to your younger self? So, Dana, do you want to share any advice?
Sure. Just a little bit of background. So I was an immigrant when I came into. I grew up as an immigrant, right? And a sense of belonging was really difficult in my younger years. And I think one thing that I would tell myself now, tell myself then, was to be unapologetic, to be and just know that you belonged. And that took me a really long time later into my adult years to really understand that I do belong. So stop being apologetic for who you are. I think that's what I would tell.
Yeah, we apologize a little bit too much, right? And I think we don't realize that of the sorry, nope, not sorry, right?
My bad. That's it. No apologies needed. My bad. Yeah. So.
And what about you, Lindsay? What advice would you give to a younger Lindsay?
Yeah, I think, again, my story is really, I stumbled upon this. I really thought I was going to go downhill with, everything and being patient with yourself, right? Lean heavily into your strengths. I have the strength finders. My number one is positivity. And sometimes I sit here and I'm like, ugh, that's so boring, but that's my strength, right? And I think that's what makes me a good leader. So lean into your strengths, even if they don't make sense right away. Hey, why is this person so positive? Well, it's because I'm here. I'm here as a leader. I'm here in operations. And like Dana said, I'm unapologetic, right? So once you dive into distribution, and for me, it was, going into people management, I found my calling. So really, they don't teach people management in school, right? They don't teach being positive is good and all of these things that seem to come naturally. Leadership, I think, is a hidden talent sometimes, right? If you have it naturally. And so really leaning into whatever that means and being good with that is probably something I would say, hey, you're going to be okay, right? You've got this.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I feel like you both touched upon respectively a lot of the things that I think we hear about, but we don't, they're like buzzwords, right? Comfort in the discomfort and tenacity and grit and authenticity. But the way that you both spoke about your career journeys and your experiences and kind of touching upon how that manifested, I think is really interesting and something to really take the time for folks who are joining us to lean into, right? To lean into that curiosity, to ask questions, to raise their hand, to say, I need time, right? To have a voice and be seen specifically, anywhere you go, but definitely it sounds like in the operation space, that's something that should be really commended and applauded. So thank you so much to you both, Dana and Lindsay, for joining us today and for sharing such fantastic advice. And thanks to all of you who tuned into the discussion. As a reminder, we will be sending out a recording of today's event along with resources to learn more about opportunities at Enovis. In the meantime, be sure to check out the Enovis profile and jobs on Fairy God Boss. You'll learn more about their benefits and the cool things that they have to offer women in the workplace. We'd also love to hear your feedback to help us improve future events. So please head to the Typeform tab on the right side of your screen to share your thoughts in a brief, I promise it's brief, 1-minute survey. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.